processing, there are 2 or 3 key concepts to keep in mind for this. First, we have to teach students that they can communicate complex concepts in simple language. So they can have really sophisticated thoughts and say it in the language that you might hear 2 or 3 or 4-year-olds using, and that's okay. It's really important for us to scaffold their critical thinking and to help them connect what they've read or listened to other texts and to personal experiences. So those are the 3 things we're after with these activities. Learning spaces, I'm going to kind of zip through because that is something you can find out more about online, and I want to move to the language piece. But essentially with learning spaces, we are looking to set up the room so that things are where they need to be and so that we guide students' interactions through the activities. And so these are just examples of different configurations we might put students in order to accomplish different types of communication tasks. Learning community, we want to generate an environment where students feel comfortable speaking in front of one another. And we can do that using the strategies you see here, particularly anything that encourages risk-taking and that supports social language. So courtesy expressions, rejoinders, giving really clear instructions can support students in feeling like it's okay to take a risk. Group norms, we can give them lists of expressions that they can use when they're having, for example, this kind of a debate. And clear routines and procedures. So it's much less cognitively taxing to figure out what the teacher is saying in the target language if the teacher has routines and procedures in place. Every time we distribute materials, we do it a certain way. Every time we form groups, we do it a certain way. When we work in pairs, that occurs in a certain way. We give feedback using certain protocols. We manage class discussions using certain protocols, and I'll put some links up to those protocols or protocols that you can try for you. But routines and procedures is huge in terms of helping students stay in the target language. You can give them guidelines for class discussions if we have materials organized, and give very, very clear instructions. So like we talked about before, the mind can't hold on to all the language and process it at once. So if we want students to follow our instructions when we're managing projects, we need to give very clear, simple instructions. So 1 step per line, no more than 5 numbered lines, and 7 to 10 words per step has worked pretty well for me. So I might say, find a partner. That's my first instruction. Get paper A and paper B. That's my second instruction. Read your paper. Discuss your paper with your partner, and then I might tell them what to do when they finish. So I want to think through every decision they have to make, everything that they actually have to stand up and do or say in order to complete the task needs to be on its own line. If I have more than 5 numbered lines, then typically that means that I probably have more like 2 activities there. So this is just an example of what I just said there. I want to provide models and examples for students of what I want them to do. I want to teach rejoinders so that as they're interacting in their groups, the stuff they want to say to each other is the social language. They want to be able to say, "You're kidding me, I didn't know that. Really? Oh." And so by providing those at the bottom of paired activities or other kinds of discussion worksheets, I'm progressively building. If they do some kind of paired activity every day in class or every week as part of their project, and I have provided these expressions all the way along, by the end of the semester, they are going to be very, very well versed in using those, and I didn't even have to explicitly teach them. So we want to take advantage of opportunities to kind of use free language there. Rejoinders, this is an example of rejoinders in Spanish, and you'll notice they're titled based on their functions. So different ways to express agreement or praise or joke around or disagreement. And this particular teacher put them up as a bulletin board. Obviously, college professors don't necessarily have that option, but you could provide some kind of conversation card, for example, with those kinds of expressions. What else do we need to scaffold? We need to scaffold the communication, and that needs to happen. We need to think about it in these 4 ways. Anything we want students to do probably needs scaffolding. So we need to think about what we want students to do, think about where that's going to break down, think about what kinds of supports they're going to need to be able to talk about it, and think about how we're going to scaffold their decision making. So here are some different types of scaffolding for communication. In this case, they are summarizing a text that they have read. And so they're drawing the event and writing at the bottom what happened. They could do this as a summary of something they read, or they could use this scaffolding to help prepare them to write something or to do some kind of video adaptation, for example. This one, they're comparing myths and legends, but you could have them comparing anything, you know, the target culture and the existing culture. And I'm using the Venn diagram as a tool for helping them to kind of think through what's the same and what's different. You could do the same task more interactively with Post-it notes, for example. So each person is contributing ideas on a Post-it note and putting those on the diagram, and then students might want to vote, for example, with little dots based on the things that they, you know, most agree with or things like that. Having them compare texts. So here is text A and text B, and there's a box for characters, environment, and events. And they could be listing characters, environments, and events as they talk. So person A is talking about their text, person B is talking about their text, and then at the bottom maybe we're going to synthesize in some way. I really love this particular one. This has a little blurb. So the second text, they have various texts, and this particular one is a little blurb that talks about infant obesity. And then text number 3 gives statistics about obesity. And then in the third section that doesn't have the dotted line around it, they're supposed to define obesity based on what they've read in the previous texts. And then they're going to share their responses with a partner. This is a little list of phrases that they can use to start sentences in order to comment on a reading with a partner. So I think that such and such happens because I'm thinking da-da-da-da-da-da. I just realized that I like this part because I'm asking myself. So you can give them different sentence starters to kind of help them with that. This would be a way to scaffold debate. So as the teacher, if I have novices who maybe can't communicate very well in the target language yet, I might give them a single sentence, such as environmental pollution is a problem that should be funded, you know, addressed by the federal government or something like that. And students have to position themselves on a continuum from agree to disagree, essentially, with neutral in the middle, and then agree, strongly agree, try to convince other people I would die for this. And it goes both ways. And then you'll see that they kind of line up under whichever one they identify with, and then you can start asking them questions. Mary, I see that you're standing under strongly agree. Give us one reason why. And you can have a template on the board or a phrase bank like the ones shown over here on the right, or conversation helpers, so that Mary has something that she can use to kind of help her frame her response. I believe that this for the following reasons, or I agree because, and then some reasons. And then I can say, John, you're standing under disagree. Give us one reason why you disagree. And then eventually I can start asking them to talk to each other. Jorge, I noticed that you're also standing under disagree. Give us a different reason than what John said about why you disagree. Mary, can you respond to John? What other reason could you give him for why he might need to change his opinion? And what you'll find is that if you carefully structure this activity like that, by the end of the class period, they will be talking to each other and responding to each other each time you make a new statement, because you have progressively prepared them to do that. I hope that's clear. It's a lot easier to see when it's done. This is an example of scaffolding that you might use to help students analyze texts from different sources. So at the top, they have source 1, source 2, source 3, source 4, and I'm writing in what my sources are. This was a video clip, this was a newspaper article, this was a comic strip, or whatever. And then on the left, it's asking what are the different criteria for analysis. So who is this particular announcement directed at? What's the focus? What parts, are eliminated or whatnot, and what register of language is this using. But you could put anything in the criteria for analysis that you want them to pay attention to. And so they can work on that collaboratively as they work through the text. Evidence cut and paste is an opportunity for them to go through the text and find evidence of assertions that you give them. So these might be different talking points. Some might be true, some might be false, some might be just controversial statements about the topic. And students are looking to find evidence in the text that supports whatever you've done. Whoops. So that might be things like, what are the pros for the course of action we've chosen in our project, and what are the cons? Find evidence for the pros out of the text that you've read, and find evidence for the cons. What is the U.S. perspective versus the perspective of people in the target language? And they're looking for evidence for those. And you could even have them in different groups where I'm looking for the U.S. perspective and my partner is looking for the target language perspective. And then assertions. Is this credible or not? So here's the assertion. Now you find me 3 pieces of evidence in the text that shows me that it's credible, or 3 pieces of evidence in the text that contradicts the assertion, or from another text that contradicts the assertion. These are, once again, sentence starters that get students thinking about the evidence. So in this case, in this situation, on page such and such, it shows that in agreement with the text or the reading, this is what it says. The author establishes that, so you're giving them little sentence starters that ups the level of their academic language as they're summarizing things. Here's an example for scaffolding their ability to give opinions. So my opinion is, and they write it in the top box, and then they list the reason for my opinion is next to razón, and then they're going to give evidence or textual examples that support the reason they've given. So that might be statistics or particular quotes out of the text. And then they're going to put the page number, and they have to provide 3 reasons to support their opinion gathered from the specific text. So this helps them with things like close reading of informational texts, and it also positions them then to be able to talk about this with other people. Now they're ready to be able to give a presentation or to respond in a debate because they've had a chance to think through their own analysis of the text. This goes back to the obesity article again, and it is kind of giving specific examples of how a person might put together an informative article. So you've got to hook the reader, and here are 5 strategies for doing it, and it gives an example of each strategy. So use a quote, use a dramatic statistic as the second box. The third box, make a shocking observation or assertion. Ask questions in the 4th box that are related to the theme. And the last box is tell a short story. And then at the bottom, it lists a bunch of questions. So what's infant obesity? What characterize it? What are its causes? And how many children suffer? And it shows how those sentences, how answering each of those questions starts to put a paragraph together. So this gives students a good idea of how to go about starting to create a text based on a particular genre, and would be an example of how I might scaffold that activity instead of just saying, I want you to write an informative paragraph about infant obesity. that we could use as part of our public service announcement, for our project that we're doing. Making a claim. So you can use sentence frames like this. Although some people believe X, it might actually be argued that Y, and students are filling in the blanks. So this is good for students who, again, don't have a lot of language, and we're trying to teach them language that they can use. And you'll notice they've color-coded it. So we've color-coded the affirmative statement green, and we've color-coded the contradicting statement orange. And you can give them, you've already seen kind of templates for what that might look like, comparing and contrasting, summarizing. So you can think about the different kinds of things you want students to do with language and put your own conversation helpers and phrase banks together for that. Analysis, cause and effect. We also want to scaffold students' thinking as they are participating in these processes. Graphic design and how things are organized can draw their attention to particular features of the text. We can guide their eyes with those particular things. So here's an example of helping them to see patterns in the language, grammatical patterns. These happen to be verbs that are irregular in the to positive command form in Spanish, and it shows that the pattern is you get rid of the go at the end. There are loads and loads of strategies like this that you can use to scaffold each of these things. And really all you have to do is Google analysis or decision-making or discussion and template, and you will find templates that look just like these that you can adapt for your own classes. We need to kind of wrap up, and so I'm going to skip through here. I want to say one quick thing about decision making. So if we want students to do something like, let's plan a game, then we need to think about what kinds of decisions would they have to make in order to generate that product. So we're thinking here about presentational communication. They are going to need to be able to think about what kinds of games they've played. What made those games fun to play? What are the characteristics of the games that you played? What do players have to do to win? Which of those elements are you going to put in your own game? So they need an opportunity to kind of think through that, and sometimes our scaffolding that we provide can help them with that kind of process. I'm going to skip through here to the end. The last thing I want to talk about is getting them ready to present. And this is an activity called Picture Walk. And so here I might give them pictures, and they are going to generate vocabulary and figure out what it is they're going to say in small groups by first labeling all of the adjectives. And then I might have them label all of the actions they see in the pictures. Then I might have them label all of the things that they see in the pictures. And then they're going to work together to take those Post-it notes and turn them into sentences. And eventually they can create paragraphs. That would be one example of how I might have them generate language at the novice level and then move them toward proficiency by having them progressively build sentences. So I know this has been a lot of information. I'm hoping that it gives you some ideas for what, in terms of what scaffolding is and why it's important and how you can start to incorporate it into the things that you are doing with learners in terms of their projects. The Buck Institute for Education website has lots of great scaffolding worksheets for the actual process of having students, form groups and generate and brainstorm ideas and prepare projects and things like that. And there are also lots of technological tools that you can use to help you with those things. And if you come to the Summer Institute this summer, we'll go into these things in more detail, and you'll have opportunities to experience these in the context of various people's projects.